Hi, welcome back. What I'd like to talk about today really is just to clarify what I believe is a misunderstanding that has found itself deeply ingrained in our society. In every AI that you consult, every Google search, and every media reference lists this same mistake. And that is that fascism is always described as a far right government. There's nothing about fascism that is rightist at all. As a proud libertarian, I believe I'm pretty familiar with what rightward thinking is. There is nothing that fascism has in common with right-leaning political philosophy. I don't want to get very far off in the weeds, and I don't think this video is going to be very long, but I do want it to be educational. I really want to clear up this misunderstanding. Fascism is left-wing. Everything about it is. So you'll find that, let's keep our discussion of specific fascist governments limited to Italy and Nazi Germany. There are other examples, but fascism, unlike gender, really does exist on a spectrum. So I don't want to talk about all the different fascist regimes in history. I don't need to discuss their similarities or their differences. But if we're going to think of a fascist regime, Nazi Germany and Mussolini's Italy, both during the Second World War, those are pretty standard fascist regimes. And the reason that I say that they are not right-leaning is because they have virtually nothing in common with right philosophy. When someone says that they're on the right side of the aisle or a rightward thinker versus left, you can think about it this way. A leftist or leftward thinker, that would, in this country, that's the Democrats. That is someone who thinks more in terms of the good that government can do. They look to government to solve social ills. They appreciate the growth of government, and they find good things associated with government action. A rightward thinker, such as myself, I see the exact opposite. I think in terms of individual liberty, not what's best for the collective, but what's best for myself and my family. I would want less tax burden. I would want less government waste, which means less government activity. I would want less of a social welfare state, less of a social safety net. You've probably heard it called. So a right-leaning thinker thinks more in terms of the individual and their family. That would mean then their community, before they think in terms of having the federal government solve a problem. Now, it doesn't really get into whether there should be a federal government or any conversation about the value or validity of revolutions or anything like that. I'm just trying to make the point that a rightward thinker thinks in terms of more limited government, accepting that means less military intervention, less social safety net, and less of government bloat and national debt. Whereas a leftward thinker thinks in terms of, even though it's more national debt and it's more foreign wars, it's more government help, it's more social welfare to protect the poor, that sort of thing. If we're talking about fascism specifically, the reason I say that it must be left-wing and not right is because every defining characteristic of a fascist government is left-wing. There are different ideas that come to the fore in different fascist governments. But there are a few hallmarks that they all have in common, like authoritarianism. That is an aspect of a fascist government. All fascist governments are always authoritarian. But what does authoritarian mean? Different people will have different ideas about it, but authoritarian essentially means, and I think you would find broad acceptance of these definitions. I'm not trying to say that fascism is good or bad. I'm not trying to say you should or shouldn't support it. I'm just trying to bring fascism to a level of understanding that we all have. And especially I'm trying to dispel the notion that it even could be a right-wing idea or concept, because it really got on my nerves the other day when I was reading something about fascism and it was described for the millionth time as a far-right type of government. So that's the impetus for this video, of course. In an authoritarian government, which a fascist government is, but like I said, an aspect of it being authoritarian, that means that power resides within the hands of just one person or a couple of people or a very small group of people. We have a government that consists of the president and the Supreme Court, so that's 10 people, plus I believe it's 455 electoral votes. So that is more than, well over 400 people in which the power of the federal government resides in, right? That's not authoritarian at all. That one thing would preclude our government from being authoritarian. Too many people would have to have a say in what the government does. Our government's not authoritarian. Another aspect of authoritarian government is that they don't have free and fair elections. Now, I'm the first to say I no longer trust the American electoral system. I had been suspicious of it for many years, but I never had any reason to be. I just knew that it was an unfounded suspicion. Now I absolutely don't trust it. That being said, do I think that every one of our elections is rigged? No, absolutely not. I think our local elections, for the most part, are free and fair. The reason I don't trust our electoral system is because on a national level, though a former president once tried to assure us all that it's impossible for a state actor to rig one of our elections, I didn't buy that then and I don't buy it now. I think that because this country has such a lax immigration policy and so many states allow voting without IDs, it's simply not possible to secure our national elections. Granted, the national elections are broken up into a bunch of smaller statewide elections, but if you got enough illegal votes cast, obviously any state can be swayed, and the electoral votes for that state go to the president. So yes, I do think the presidential elections can be swayed. Whether they have or not in the past, I don't know. I have my opinions, but again, I'm not here to espouse my opinions or convince you about elections. I want to stay focused on just what fascism is. So they don't have free and fair elections in an authoritarian system. They also don't allow dissent. Now, this is one thing that irritates me to no end. Every single person in this country that has decried Donald Trump for being authoritarian, or fascist specifically, has done so, and the very act of them doing so indicates his lack of authoritarianism. The fact that the irony is not lost on these people also irritates me. That means that the people that are the loudest voice, which has been true for a long time, are the ones that know the least. I wish that weren't what appears to be a natural aspect of human society, but more and more it seems like it is. There are other aspects of fascist regimes like what's called ultra-nationalist or militarist. Those are aspects of fascist regimes, yes, but they're also basically ubiquitous in all government. Not the American government. Our government doesn't care at all about nationalism. Our government doesn't care if you're patriotic. It doesn't encourage patriotism. It doesn't have anything to do with nationalism, really. So I guess that's another reason that our government is not fascist. But so in fascist governments, there is an ultra-nationalist sort of bent to their machinations. And about the militarism, most nations that have a military do parade it. That doesn't make all governments with a military a militarist type government. So since I don't have a poli-sci degree and I'm not trying to get a bunch of political science majors all in a tizzy, I'll just say that our country is maybe more militaristic than I would like for it to be, but it's not a militaristic type of government. That's not our setup. Our lack of militarism and ultranationalism are another way that you can see that our government is not fascist, but examples of militaristic governments include North Korea, Russia, China. Those governments are all very left-wing and militaristic. As China's economy becomes worse, my understanding is they're lurched toward more nationalism or even ultranationalism, which I wouldn't say that it's crossed that threshold yet. Their nationalism is getting more and more. When Russia first invaded Ukraine, they held strongly to their nationalist heritage. Nationalism goes hand in hand with left-wing governments, not right-wing governments. A right-wing government doesn't want a strong military. They might care a lot about national defense, but they would defend their nation like, I believe it's Sweden or Finland, that requires homes be armed. That's how you, in a rightward way, defend your homeland. You understand that the citizens may be required to fight. That is not militaristic. And the last point that I want to make about a fascist regime, and this one is the most important because not only is it ubiquitous across fascist regimes, but it is the one that is the most dangerous. And it's called a cult of personality. There's a geopolitical specialist that I used to listen to almost religiously. And he would speak of a cult of personality that Xi Jinping in China had cultivated for himself. And I didn't really understand what that meant. I heard him say it a few times. I thought I knew, but I wanted to go find out for sure. So I did a Google search, and that led me to an AI search. And I realized that I didn't know what a cult of personality is. A cult of personality is I go back to thinking in 1990 during the invasion of Iraq, that was the first time I'd seen a sitting leader of a country on his own currency. And I saw the statue of Saddam Hussein fall, and that reminded me of this. When you have the sitting leader on the currency, that's a sure sign that there's a cult of personality at least brewing, if it's not already in full swing. A cult of personality really is what I call leader worship. The most clear case of this that you'll find throughout the world is in North Korea. That is absolutely a cult of personality. Their government is fascist. Their government's also socialist. Um, it's totalitarian. There's lots of different bad words that can be used to describe that whole of a country. Um, but cult of personality is definitely most obvious in that government as compared to the others. Um, you may have heard stories about when Kim Jong il passed, that some Korean citizens were led away from the mourning ceremony and killed because they didn't cry hard enough or they stopped crying too soon. That's why you see these ridiculous videos of people, and I'm sure you can find it online, where they're just absolutely more than going to pieces. They're making a production of how distraught they are at his passing. At the time when I saw this, I didn't understand why they were doing it. I just thought they were crazy or dumb or something. No, it's because they all knew that if anyone in the government decided that they weren't crying hard enough, that they could be killed for not crying hard enough. That's a cult of personality. That is leader worship. Um, there are other places that had that in history. Hitler, obviously, Stalin. Stalin was all over posters and currency during his lifetime. Mao Zedong, another brutal dictator in history, absolutely cultivated a cult of personality around himself. The reason I wanted to define the authoritarianism, the nationalism, the militarism, and the cult of personality is because most commonly I found that these are the aspects that are described to fascist governments. Absolutely none of these aspects is what any right-leaning thinker would want in their government. They're not what a right-leaning population would allow in their government. Fascism is not right-wing. It is now, always has been, and can only be part of the left-wing ideology. If you do happen to disagree with me for any reason, please let me know. I'd like to hear about it. Thank you.